Hello, welcome, good evening. My name's Bastani. This is Novara Live. Tonight I have the immeasurable pleasure of being joined by 50% of the B team, Mike Bankole. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. It's another Tuesday. The B team are back in action. So, yeah, it's going to be a good one.
Yes, the midweek B team. I did like to see you, actually, I have to say, on the BBC the other day, Mike. It's always good to see Novara acolytes are working their way through legacy media, the old media. Of course, the new media is leading the way. Coming up later tonight, we inspect Labour's policy for GB Energy and what it really means for the UK's energy supply and, more importantly, your bills. The harrowing story of the Palestinian girl who had her leg amputated without anaesthesia. And Novara's own Moya Lothian-McLean confronts a senior Labour MP over the farce that has been the party's selection process. Stay tuned for all of that. After becoming both the leader of Reform UK as well as the party's parliamentary candidate in Clacton-on-Sea, Nigel Farage went to the Essex coast.
In over 20 years in the European Parliament, getting up, giving those speeches, being involved in those fights, I can tell you after 20 years there, I enjoyed it much more than they did.
By the way, can you imagine Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak drawing a crowd like that with just a few hours' notice? Not weeks, not days, a few hours. And you even get a better sense of the enthusiasm that many in Clacton clearly have for Farage from this newsagent's clip.
So this is the most economically deprived area in England.
I know. Thank
Would
you
apologise for what Brexit's done to Clacton?
No, thank you.
Well done, Emily.
Thank you.
What are your priorities for this Emily, Nigel's endorsed.
Money. Well, standing up for people is very important, and particularly for small businesses who, sadly. All right, thank you very much.
Just to go back, so
This has got the most inactive. This has got.
All right.
What are you going to do to help those who aren't in work?
Brexit has cost every household £2,000.
right.
What's your answer to that?
Hello. All right.
Can you answer that, Mr. Farage?
I didn't hear the question.
Brexit has cost every household £2,000.
Oh, put a
minimum.
note on.
Okay, so you don't care.
You're right.
You don't care.
Fine,
You don't care that Brexit has made Clacton worse off. Is that what you said?
That's fine.
Is there an apology to the
Don't
people of
panic.
Clacton?
That's a man who knows he doesn't have to answer to the agenda of the Westminster Media Pack. And he also knows that message, ignoring them, which he sends out to the people he's targeting. He's saying, I don't really care what the media think, and actually, many of them quite like it. But not everyone in Clacton is a fan of Nigel Farage. That clip just showed somebody throwing a milkshake at Nigel Farage for people listening to this on the podcast. And images of that incident have gone viral online. A 25-year-old woman has reportedly been arrested on suspicion of assault in relation to that action. But Nigel Farage seems to be taking it all in his stride, posting this after the event.
My milkshake brings all the people to the rally.
While Farage may be buoyed by his reception in Clacton, Conservative Party candidates are not. GB News' Christopher Hope has reported this. New, up to 6 Tory election candidates could switch to Reform UK in coming days after Nigel Farage's shock decision to stand as a candidate and lead the party into polling day, GB News can disclose. The candidates, at least one of a former Conservative Party MP in the last Parliament, are in a race against time to make up their minds. So 5 of those candidates are candidates, but they're not MPs from the 2019 cohort, or so we think. All parties must submit their nominations for the July 4th general election by 4 p.m. on Friday this week. In other words, there's a real race to get those people to join Reform as candidates. One candidate that GB News spoke to said they may be persuaded not to abandon the Tories by Sunak's performance in the leaders' debate tonight. So even more pressure on the Prime Minister there. Other Tories are begging, however, Farage to show a little mercy. This was from the Times' political editor, Stephen Swinford. Exclusive. A Red Wall Tory MP says Labour is on course for overwhelming victory as he appeals to Nigel Farage to stand down Reform candidates in seats with right-wing Conservatives. Marco Longhi, Tory MP for Dudley North, says Farage is a, quote, hugely talented politician who should have been given a peerage and recognition for his achievements. He says Farage will have no one left to partner with in the Commons if he wins Clacton, but kills off all the Tory Brexiteers. Longhi insisted that he will fight, quote, tooth and nail for the Tories. Meanwhile, other Tories seem to have decided to just let the Farage-induced depression wash over them. Here's Veterans Minister Johnny Mercer.
Morning, Plymouth. It's another fantastic day on the campaign trail. Everyone's feeling really good. No, they're not really. It's pretty hard going, these general elections. I'll be honest with you. It's raining. Everyone's pretty tired, and yesterday was a pretty shit day.
I don't really agree with them on very much, but the honesty is respected in this instance. Mike, it's been the big story really of the last 24 hours. Farage is on the pitch. Reform might just win 1 or 2 MPs. I mean, 1 would be a big accomplishment. What does it mean? Not just for this general election campaign now, for what, the next 29 days, 28 days, but also for potentially the next Parliament if Nigel Farage is the Member of Parliament for Clacton-on-Sea.
I think it would be huge, right? And I think what Farage has done in recent years is essentially dominate the debate on immigration, right? And it's really interesting. I think Farage is someone who I don't think is widely popular, but he's been popular enough to cause problems to both major parties, right? So what both major parties try to do, because he mainstreams this idea of immigration being a problem, is both parties have often started from that point. So now we see both parties essentially speak about immigration as a problem and propose policies to this effect, right? So Conservative announced new policies today. Starmer, who previously was a passionate advocate of free movement, is now saying the Conservatives have been too liberal on immigration, right? So he's now shifting to the right on immigration as well. Yet another U-turn from Keir Starmer there. And I think it would, in many ways, kind of add to this idea that, you know, Farage is an important person, and we must, as the major party, shift our policies because he's so popular. So I think if Starmer was an MP, that's what would happen. We would see both parties, with major parties, move to the right of immigration. And this always happens. It seems to be a cycle with Farage where immigration becomes an issue. He, you know, rises to prominence again. He's doing all the news rounds. He's talking at some rally at one of his parties, whether it's the Brexit Party or UKIP or now Reform UK. These parties shift to the right, and we continue and go through this kind of cycle, this endless loop of Farage being this guy. And I do find his hypervisibility slightly peculiar because he's never been an MP. He's an MEP for a number of years. But he's essentially just a man who rants about immigration a lot. And you compare him to someone like, and that's me being facetious, let's be clear. But if you compare him to someone like Caroline Lucas, right? Caroline Lucas has been an MP since 2010. So 14 years. She's standing now at this general election. But this is someone who, for her parliamentary career, you know, she's built a strong career on campaigning for the environment and campaigning about the climate emergency. Now, over the last 14 years, what's happened is the climate emergency has become hugely salient, right? It's become a huge issue. We speak about it all the time. Yet she's nowhere near as visible as someone like Farage. She's literally a member of parliament. So I do think what's also happening here is the mainstream press, because he's a great, you know, political speaker in terms of like how he speaks, not in terms of his ideas. Ideas are absolutely trash, but he's charismatic enough that people like somehow want to listen to him. They've mainstreamed this guy and put him on front and center of debates instead of giving, you know, the Green Party or the Lib Dems kind of more space to breathe, more space to espouse their ideas. And that's how we end up on this endless loop of Farage just dominating the news for a period of time, and then both parties shifting to the right because of it. So I do think this is like this kind of endless loop of Farage that's going to keep happening. Will just continue if he becomes an MP, and it's deeply frustrating.
I think there's something to that. I mean, I wasn't so sure when people used to say that a lot years ago. And I would say, well, look, he's led a party to be the largest party amongst the UK parties in the European Parliament. So in 2014, 2019, he led 2 parties which won a national election. But 2019 is 5 years ago. And like you say, he's never been a councillor, he's never been an MP. So at this point, he's now a parliamentary candidate, fine. But like you say, he's just really been a campaigner for the last 5 years, Mike. He's been somebody who has strong opinions and stuff. That's fine. But it doesn't give him more political legitimacy than literal members of parliament. And let's be real, he has the exposure he does because yes, he's very popular and he's a big political brand. I mean, that's because of stuff like going on I'm a Celeb. We probably need a conversation in this country of, okay, well, do we shine the spotlight on people to this extent because they've been on I'm a Celeb? I suppose if you're being charitable, because there's another story, which is the collapse of the Tories, and this is only going to make that significantly worse, I guess it makes some sense. But what's key here is, look, they weren't shining that spotlight on Richard Tice before, were they? Let's be honest. I didn't even know Richard Tice was standing for Parliament until today. He's standing in Boston. You, of course, know about Lee Anderson. He's an MP. But this is really extraordinary. I mean, Farage has a unique political brand in this country. By deciding to run in this election for reform, Nigel Farage has certainly put a cat amongst the pigeons. But what exactly does he stand for? On the Today programme, Farage revealed a couple of policy pitches.
We should deport people who come to Britain illegally, and we used to. It's quite interesting. I mean, the last year of the Labour government, we deported 45,000 people. Now, we're lucky if we deport more than 5,000 or 6,000 people. And we're not going to be able to do any of this because of the increased activism of the European Court of Human Rights. And one of the main things we have to do is to leave that court and to get genuine sovereignty over our territory. And you know something? Once people know that if they come to Britain illegally, they absolutely will not be allowed to stay, they will stop coming.
Isn't it funny? When he was campaigning to leave the European Union for years, I mean, he did it for a very long time, from the late 1990s all the way through to 2019, we can only have Brexit, hard Brexit. Brexit means Brexit if we also leave the ECHR. I don't recall hearing that. Maybe it was in circulation. I certainly don't remember hearing it. Those policies of leaving the ECHR and immediate deportations of migrants arriving irregularly are ones that hardline Tories have been calling for since 2019 at least. But as one Tory Home Secretary after another has found, they're not straightforward to implement. That, though, isn't the point. Farage, as always, is playing the tune on immigration, and both Labour and the Tories will, as Mike has already said, inevitably dance. Now, Farage was talking about irregular migration there, but Labour's Keir Starmer has been outlining his views on legal migration. He told Sky News this.
That migration is far too high. This government has lost control. It is now more than twice as high as it was when we were in the EU. That's the irony of it. This Prime Minister is actually, for all his tough talk, is the most liberal Prime Minister when it comes to immigration. Those numbers have gone through the roof. They need to come down.
Can you just say that you will guarantee that it will come down under a Labour government?
They need to come down. We've got a plan to bring them down. But you can't wish them down. That's what the Tories are doing, just plucking numbers and wishing and hoping for the best. You have to understand why they're high. The skills strategy isn't here. We need to fix that. And we need to bear down on bad bosses who are undercutting Labour standards. That's what we would do.
That was Keir Starmer, Mr. Stop Brexit, calling the Prime Minister who did more than any other to push through the inhumane Rwanda scheme a liberal. But while Starmer positions himself as the leader of choice for right-wingers who don't really like migrants, let's take a look at what he had to say about migration just 4 years ago.
Conservatives have created this hostile environment, whether it's Windrush, whether it's the general response to immigration, or whether it's just the way the Home Office make their decisions. It's based on this idea that somebody's trying to cheat rather than actually based on an open, welcoming environment. I think we should welcome people wherever they come from, thank them for their contribution, and see them as part of our families, our communities, and our society, and embrace that.
Good old Keir Starmer, and Mr. Liberal, stop Brexit, and Mr. I support migration. He even went to debates in support of Palestine. But the minute the gentleman is anywhere near power, goodbye. It's like he's had a personality transplant. It's like that film Face Off with John Travolta. Has somebody changed their face with Keir Starmer from 2019? You'd almost think so. It really is like watching a wholly different person. Mike, what did you make of those two clips?
Yeah, I think it just exposes Keir Starmer really there, because Keir Starmer knows that we can make a kind of liberal and compelling and compassionate case for welcoming migrants into our communities and you're treating them like human beings. I think often the label migrants can rob them of their humanity. At the end of the day, these are human beings, right, who deserve to be treated with dignity and with compassion and with love. That should be at the heart of any immigration policy pursued by any government moving forward. But it won't be, because both parties have started, because of partly because of the Farage impact and just in general, immigration for a number of years has been viewed as a problem. So both parties start from that point of view, right? Immigration is a problem. And then they just, for no reason other than because they view it as a problem, they just start ranting on about how it needs to be reduced. But then you think about it, right? The NHS, right? We had these long waiting lists, right? If we were just to kind of reduce immigration drastically and make it more difficult for people to enter this country, the NHS would suffer, right? Because we had these long waiting lists, they would get even longer because the NHS is quite dependent on migrant workers and migrant staff, right? So we can't just arbitrarily say, well, immigration is a problem now, we're going to cut immigration numbers. So anything these politicians say, it doesn't even make any sense. And I think moving beyond the kind of we need them for our public service argument, I do think that's a valid argument. But I just think the kind of moral argument for this, what we need actually in this moment of time, isn't stricter border policies or stricter the movements of people entering this country. What we need is to look after those who do arrive in this country, because often people arriving in this country, I'm using the word people rather than migrants. I think it's important to humanize these people. They're arriving to this country and being stripped of rights and life's being made incredibly difficult for them. So what we need actually in this country is politicians who are brave enough to look in the eyes of Farage and say, well, actually, no, we're not going to, tolerate any of this nonsense about, these people coming over this country are a problem. You're the problem. The rhetoric you're espousing is divisive. It's full of hate. It's derogatory. This is what we need to happen. But unfortunately, as always is going to be the case, and I think the debate tonight's going to be interesting in terms of immigration coming up and how both leaders respond to that in front of a live audience with the nation watching. What's going to happen, as I suspect, is both parties are going to try and outflank each other on who could be the most brutal on immigration. And that's where we are at the moment, right? That's where we are with immigration, is who can be the most brutal, who can be the most malicious. What we need is, focusing on improving the rights of all workers in this country, including those who have come to work and live in this country from abroad. That's what we need to be focused on. We need to end the hostile environment, which pushes people into destitution. Keir Starmer spoke about the Windrush scandal just now in that clip. More than 50 claimants for the Windrush scandal compensation scheme have died waiting for compensation. These are the things we need to address, yet both parties seem to start from this point of view that immigration is a problem. And until we end that thinking, we'll get no progress whatsoever.
I think that's so true. You look at the way that the Home Office works. You look at immigration as necessarily a problem, necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I would integrate immigration with a Department for Labour, personally. Old-fashioned, I know. What I find really intriguing here, but park one's personal feelings on this subject, what's inarguable is that if you have, as Farage is proposing, net zero migration, which is to say 500,000 people leave a year, you can allow 500,000 people to enter the country. That has massive costs. Massive costs. It'll mean inflation because you'll have bottlenecks in certain industries and they'll become more expensive. And it'll mean higher taxes because Starmer is talking about training more people. Everybody says we need to train more nurses, train more. Great, I agree. Let's do it. It's going to cost money, right? And by the way, they're going to want more. They're going to want more money. That's the inflation point. And I think the best line of attack with somebody like Farage, which doesn't happen, right? The liberal media doesn't think like this, is that you're not being honest about the costs of the policies you're talking about. It's going to mean higher inflation. It's going to mean lower GDP growth, fine, whatever. It's going to mean higher inflation and it's going to mean higher taxation. Okay, if that's the policy that a majority of people in this country want, but they only ever hear the upsides. Well, I don't like X, Y, Z, so let's stop it. Okay, but it also means this. Do you still support it? If inflation is 6-7% for the next 5 years, if your taxes go up, do you still support it? Reform voting Silver Fox that's in their home county's garden centre every Sunday. I mean, some of them won't, right? And that's the point of having a sensible debate around all this stuff. But we don't get that. I think it's probably quite useful actually to take some of the emotions out of it sometimes and talk in those terms, particularly on the legal migration thing, which is the one that Starmer's talking about. If Starmer is a so-called centre-left, he called himself a socialist, leader of the Labour Party, cannot say, well, this whole conversation means costs for the taxpayer, for the public, for the voter. If you can't say that, then nobody in elite politics is going to say it. I find that absolutely insane. If you do want some people to say it, however, you know what to do. Support our work here at novaramedia.com. Go to novaramedia.com/support. We are covering this election like nobody else. Help us do that. You may have seen my Vox Pop in Godalming in Surrey from Saturday. Help us create more stuff like that. Go to places that nobody else is going. I don't think anybody would call Godalming left behind, but it's certainly politically interesting. The link is in the description for that if you want to help our work here at Novara Media. Northern Israel is on fire. Bushfires have spread across the region after a Hezbollah rocket attack launched from Lebanon set large swathes of Israeli territory alight. The city of Kiryat Shmona near the Lebanese border has been evacuated, with fires lapping at its outskirts. And in the illegally occupied Golan Heights, around 2,500 acres of land were engulfed in flames. 6 Israeli soldiers were injured in those fires, and the political reaction from some Israeli leaders has been extreme. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said this: "What is happening in the north is moral bankruptcy. We're seeing a continuation of a policy that led directly to October 7th. It's time for all of Lebanon to burn." Meanwhile, Israel's far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich took this view. A year ago, there was a defense minister who said that we will return Lebanon to the Stone Age. Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Defense Minister, Mr. Chief of Staff, the time has come. There is full backing from the entire Israeli people. That's 2 senior government ministers calling not only for a war with Lebanon, but calling for its decimation, collective punishment, war crimes. And strangely, it's coming right on time, according to a report in one of Israel's daily Hebrew language newspapers, Israel Hayom, sometimes dubbed Bibiton because of its support for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi, as he's sometimes called. The paper reports this. A Lebanese newspaper, Al Akhbar, known for its close ties to Hezbollah, reported on Tuesday that Beirut had recently received diplomatic messages containing threats of an impending Israeli attack. Sources told the newspaper that most representatives from international delegations expressed concern over the severity of the Israeli threat. However, the most significant messages came from the British side, which estimated that Israel would attack in mid-June. The British also advised Lebanon to prepare for war, the duration and scope of which remain unknown. The battle between Hezbollah and Israel has been slowly escalating over recent weeks. It's resulted in some 60,000 Israelis being evacuated from the northern regions of the country, and over 100,000 Lebanese citizens having to flee southern Lebanon. But while Hezbollah has largely focused its attacks on northern Israel, the IDF has been targeting sites much deeper inside Lebanon. Since the end of May, there have been multiple airstrikes across southern and even central Lebanon, hitting civilian areas as well as farmland and olive groves. Israeli airstrikes inside Lebanon have killed more than 400 people in recent months, more than 70 of them civilians. And Israel has also been charged with using white phosphorus in areas with high civilian populations. With war growing more likely, who stands to benefit the most from such an increase in hostilities? Well, US President Joe Biden has an opinion. Time magazine has today published a transcript of an interview with the president containing this interesting exchange. Reporter to President Biden, some in Israel have suggested that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Do you believe that? To which Joe Biden replies, "I'm not going to comment on that. There is every reason for people to draw that conclusion." The escalation on the Israel-Lebanese border comes as Hamas and Israel appear to be in a stalemate over the latest Gaza ceasefire proposal. In Israel, right-wing hardliners in the cabinet have refused to consider a deal that calls an end to the country's mission impossible, i.e. destroying Hamas. But the government is under increasing pressure from the US to accept it. For their part, Hamas won't agree to a deal that doesn't also include the withdrawal of Israel from Gaza. At the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu is under growing pressure from those same hardliners eager to see evacuated Israeli citizens return to northern Israel, with the majority of Israelis believing that a war with Lebanon is required to restore security to the region. Put those pieces of the puzzle together, and you begin to understand how we might get an Israeli-backed ceasefire in Gaza in exchange for a new war with Lebanon in the north, and Benjamin Netanyahu hanging on to power just a little bit longer. 14,000 children have been killed in Gaza since Israel began its assault on the enclave in October. But a further 12,000 have been injured in a region where Israel's war has made hospital care patchy and where urgent medical supplies have been frequently blocked from entering the territory. One of those children is Ahed Seiso. Video of her urgent treatment after a bomb blast went viral in December. Sky News has now investigated what became of the young girl who endured this.
My name is Ahed Seiso, and her uncle amputated her leg without anesthesia.
My uncle put me in the table. I looked around. There was no surgical equipment. He got the washer and the cleaning tools from the kitchen and started to clean my leg. I looked at him and said, "Don't cut my leg off." He started to cry. Then he cut my leg off.
It was lunchtime on Tuesday, December the 19th. An Israeli tank shell hit the family house. It is a wonder Ahed survived. She did so only because her uncle did the unimaginable. An amputation in a war zone with a kitchen knife.
The strength came from within, because I never want to give my occupier the opportunity to kill us all and silence us.
His decision to film it, to make one moment of horror go viral, would precipitate a journey from Gaza to Egypt and then to America.
Ahed's journey to the US was made possible by a chain of volunteers. It begins with Tarek Hailet, an American medical student who heads up the treatment abroad program of the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. He works with other organizations to get injured children out of Gaza and to the United States for medical treatment. It's a difficult process. Ahed had to be moved south through Gaza to the Egyptian border by volunteers, all during a war. Visas had to be secured, but were often denied. But Tarek eventually succeeded in getting Ahed out of Gaza, with further volunteers accompanying her on the long journey to Denver, Colorado. And here's what happened next.
So good to see you. I'm so glad you're here. So glad you're here.
Dr. Omar Mubarak is a vascular surgeon who can make things happen. And beyond the welcome, he has arranged for Ahed a new leg.
Excited?
Happy, but I forget my shoes. The right shoes.
You forgot the right shoe. Oh. I'm so happy for her right now. So happy to be able to supply this for her. Yeah,
You're what's brought them to Denver.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, good for you. We'll leave you to it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The fitting was a private moment for her. But then a moment we'll all remember. From that day in December, the amputation, a viral video, strangers have brought Ahed a long way.
So happy for you. I don't know how you can see what's going on and not say to yourself, we've got to help these people. It's very painful. I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. And I think that gentleman there, Mr. Omar Mubarak, we need more people like that in the world and fewer people like Bibi Netanyahu. We'd be going in a positive direction as a species when that happens. And the sad thing is, I think lots of, or people who I thought were good people, are not only not doing things to help, but they're actually giving tacit consent to what we're seeing in Gaza. And that includes most of our political class. And it really is quite astonishing. You have a person there whose job is medicine, to give life, to save life, to heal, to mend, to return to good health. It shouldn't just be left to him, though. Politicians should be creating the space, the possibilities, the parameters for people like this Ahed to get better, to be healed, and it's not happening. We've had politicians, allegedly progressive politicians in this country, abstaining on a ceasefire. Abstaining on a ceasefire in a conflict where you have tanks launching shells into civilian homes and a young woman loses a leg and it has to be amputated by her relative. And we have politicians in this country who have abstained on that. Initially, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party was saying that Israel has every right to respond in any way it sees fit. Just extraordinary. Ahed will remain in the US for the foreseeable future, but it's a country that understandably fills her with conflict.
When you see people happy to see you or trying their best to support you, you feel that there is someone still care. It is something I will never forget. But the first thing I thought about was how I could leave Gaza and seek treatment in a country that is possibly even more than Israel, largely responsible for my condition. If anyone asked me about it, I would say America kills a person and then attend their funeral.
Really powerful words. And I just keep on thinking about that doctor, Mike. You know, he's performed something extraordinary there. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't see it like that. It's just his job. It's his calling. We're dealing with such awful human beings, though. I can almost see lobbyists, interest groups calling the guy an anti-Semite, calling him an extremist, a fundamentalist, where he's just trying to help people walk, right? And the words there of Ahed, I think, were so powerful in terms of the role of the United States in all of this. In decades past, there have been conflicts overseas. You've had people like this benefit from US healthcare, US medical knowledge, and often it's been promoted as a kind of feel-good story, right? You had this with Iraqis, for instance, from the Second Gulf War. They'd go to the US, they would be helped in some way. Invariably, it was young people or children. And this was often sold to the US audience as a kind of feel-good story. Look, we're the good guys. And I think things are so bad with regards to the US's role in this story, this genocide, that actually that's impossible. What's your view on that?
Absolutely. I think what we've seen there is a reminder of the brutality of Israel's assaults, right? I read somewhere this morning, actually, Save the Children reported that more than 10 children on average have lost one or both of their legs in Gaza since the October 7th, right? This is horrific, right? And I think the US are complicit in this. Let's be absolutely frank about this. Biden has, not used strong enough language at times, and the US is still arming and funding Israel. So Biden this morning, actually, I think he said something he spoke to Time magazine, and he spoke about how we might have suspicion or we might have reason to believe that Israel are prolonging this for their own political preservation. People have been saying this for months, right? So why has the US been funding Israel for this period of time? It's been quite clear to loads of people what's going on, what's happening. This is an assault, a genocide on civilians, and yet the US has done nothing about this. And I think the US's role in this should be made clear, as should the UK's role in this, by the way. And I think our political class, including the Labour Party, should be the party of justice. They are also, in some ways, complicit in this as well. So I think our political class have no ideas in terms of progressive thinking on this issue. And it left us in a position now where, we have these heroic stories of resistance and making do in Gaza, but it's not enough. There should be infrastructure for these people. There should be more support for these people. And our political class are kind of sitting on their hands, starting from a position of Israel's right to defend itself, and Israel is acting in good faith. And that still seems to be some of the thinking inside the political class. So it's a real shame. And I think, this next government this next kind of parliament we're going to see is going to be full of people who are very, very pro-Israel, who have the instincts of Israel's right to defend itself, who has this instinctive belief that any condemnation of Israel is anti-Semitic. And if that's a starting place, we're not going to make any progress on this issue at all when it comes to putting pressure on Israel and trying to in some ways affect or stop or halt its assault on Gaza. So this is a desperately sad story, a story of both resistance, but also a failure of politicians around the world to stop Israel and hold it to account.
You know, the US could stop this war tomorrow. It could have stopped it 3 months ago, 5 months ago. You know, it's been giving so much aid to Israel. I think it was that $14 billion package. You know, Israel gets everything from the United States. Everything, civilian technologies, F-35s, you name it, everything. Intelligence. This could have ended a very long time ago. Of course, there was direct action recently against a Leonardo factory here in the UK. I think it was in Edinburgh. And in that factory, they create the sites for the F-35s that go to Israel. If states won't act, that's precisely the kind of thing you have to do. And you mentioned there a moment ago, Mike, about the kinds of parliamentarians we'll be looking at in the next parliament. 73 Labour MPs today are Labour Friends of Israel. I'm really curious as to how many Labour MPs after July the 4th will be quote-unquote Labour Friends of Israel. I think it'll be substantially higher. One of them, of course, is Luke Akehurst, who's a lobbyist for Israeli interests. We have a great piece on our website, novara.com, written by Stephen Methan, about him, his politics. He's called Palestinian children since October the 7th who've been maimed and mauled. He's basically insinuated that they're crisis actors. He's bought into the Pallywood meme, myth, lie. He has called the UN anti-Semitic, and he's called Human Rights Watch liars. That's somebody who will be a parliamentarian. And finally, we have had, since the Faiza Shaheen story in recent days, the last week, this idea that saying there is an Israeli lobby, saying that it exists is anti-Semitic. It's just complete nonsense. Next week, I'll be interviewing Ilan Pappé. He's written a great new book about the history of the Israeli lobby in the US and UK. It's just outlandish to say it doesn't exist. And it's certainly not racist to say that there is an Israeli lobby. There is. It's very well equipped, very well resourced. There's a long and storied history of success. Keir Starmer has junked almost all of his leadership pledges from 2020. Foremost among those was the commitment to public ownership of water and energy. All gone, naturally. After all, guys, this is Keir Starmer. Well, maybe not entirely gone, because the Labour leader is still committed to GB Energy. That will be a publicly owned energy company. Here's how Labour officially describe GB Energy on their website. Labour will set up Great British Energy, a publicly owned clean power company to cut bills for good and boost energy security, paid for by a proper time-limited windfall tax on oil and gas giants. Headquartered in Scotland, Great British Energy will ensure jobs and supply chains are built here in the UK, developing our clean energy industries. Labour's plan will lower bills because renewables are far cheaper than gas. Great British Energy is part of Labour's Green Prosperity Plan to create 650,000 good jobs, cut bills by £300 on average, and deliver real energy security. That all sounds rather wonderful, doesn't it? And perhaps because GB Energy is one of Labour's 6 first steps for change, it even has a website of its own. Here's more information about what the project means for the British public. Britain already has public ownership of energy, just by foreign governments. Taxpayers abroad profit more from our energy than we do. It's time to take back control of our energy. A first step of a Labour government will be to set up a new publicly owned champion, Great British Energy, to give us real energy security from foreign dictators. I'm getting a theme here. Great British Energy will be owned by the British people, built by the British people, and benefit the British people. It will be headquartered in Scotland, invest in clean energy across our country, and make the UK a world leader in floating offshore wind, nuclear power, and hydrogen. We already are a bit of a world leader in wind, but whatever, not floating. Okay, I'll grant you that. Finally, though, we get to the nitty-gritty. What will it actually do? Here's more information from that same standalone website. Number 1. Co-investing in new technologies. Great British Energy will help speed up and scale the deployment of new technologies, with public investment helping to crowd in investment in areas like floating offshore wind, tidal power, and hydrogen as they develop into mature technologies. This is key. Crowd in. So there'll be significant private investment that will be presumably unlocking. Number 2. scale and accelerate mature technologies. So the first one is about new technologies. This is about old technologies. Great British Energy will also help scale and accelerate the rollout of mature technologies like wind, solar, and nuclear. It will partner with existing private sector firms to speed up deployment of mature, renewable technologies to meet our ambitious clean power timelines. It will also build organizational capability and expertise, I don't know what that means, to deliver energy mega projects like nuclear power stations, reducing project and construction risk. I have zero idea what that means. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Number 3, and this is really interesting, scale up municipal and community energy. GB Energy will partner with energy companies, local authorities, and cooperatives to develop 8 gigawatt small-scale and medium-scale community energy projects. Profits will flow directly back into local communities to cut bills, not to the shareholders of foreign companies. This will help to create a more decentralized energy system with more local generation ownership, and will help to create a more resilient energy system. Interesting. I mean, look, if you're tired of money going to the shareholders of foreign-owned companies, what are you going to do about water, by the way? Or Royal Mail, right? The post office is being sold at the moment to a Czech guy. Same thing. Anyway, this is interesting because from what I can see, what's being proposed here isn't a publicly owned energy company, but rather a green investment bank, a bit like the one the coalition sold off in the early 2010s. And that's fine. We like green investment banks here at Novara Media, but it's not an energy company. Speaking to BBC Radio Scotland, Starmer said GB Energy was an, quote, investment vehicle, not an energy company. However, that was quickly corrected, with the party saying that while GB Energy will not be an energy retail company, it will generate power in its own right. That's as well as owning, managing, and operating clean power projects alongside private firms. This all seems very ambiguous, I have to say, and you'd kind of hope that Keir Starmer would know what he's talking about, given it's one of his 6 main policies. And today, the Labour leader tweeted this: energy is a matter of national security. Heating our homes should not mean leaving our front door open to Russia. The bloody Russians. Labour will set up Great British Energy to bring down bills and deliver energy security. We'll take on Putin with an investment vehicle. He's a second Hitler. That's why we need more PFI. Or maybe it's a green bank. I don't really know. Here is the Evening Standard reporting what Starmer said earlier on today. With Great British Energy, my changed Labour Party will close the door on Putin, Sir Keir said. Energy policy is now a matter of national security. It is a key component of our country's resilience and capacity to weather future shocks. We simply cannot afford to remain as vulnerable to price spikes as we have been in the past. Keeping the lights on and heating our homes should not mean leaving our front door open to Russia. Now, I'm afraid this could not be more inaccurate and misleading. Before the Ukraine war, very little oil and gas came from Russia. In fact, in the case of gas, less than 5% of gas we use in this country was from Russia. It was around 4%. Most of it came from Norway. I wouldn't think many people would think that's an authoritarian hellhole. Although, of course, conflict did mean rocketing energy prices. But why? And why does that make Starmer's statement totally nonsensical? Well, this is really interesting. It's really key in terms of GB Energy being able to keep bills lower, which I think is fundamentally untrue. A finance journalist, Liam Halligan, gave a very good explanation of this earlier this year.
We've got some of the biggest offshore wind farms in the world, and we're seeing some of those pictures now. We've got wave power, we've got solar power. But the reality is we still use gas-fired power stations for about 40% of our electricity as well. Why? Because gas can literally be fired up. That's where the phrase comes from. We can turn on our gas-fired power stations when the sun doesn't shine and when the wind doesn't blow, which, as you rightly say, is pretty often in this country. And the reality is we've got 32 gas-fired power stations now. A lot of them are coming to the end of their natural life. And we need more gas-fired power stations because however much we use renewables, we can't always use them for obvious climatic and weather-related reasons. So we need what's called baseload power, power that's always there, power to keep the lights on, power to keep hospitals up and running, power to keep us warm in the winter, power literally to stop the lights going out and the world's fifth biggest economy crashing to its knees in a way that will have massive implications for investment and the lives and livelihoods of people in this country. And why is electricity in this country so much more expensive than many other Western countries, both for domestic and for commercial users? It is, Martin, because we've got such a high share of renewables, not the fact that we've got a high share of renewables per se, that could be really good news, but we've got such a high share of renewables before we've really solved the problem of how to store renewable energy, and with an absence of other power that can come in to fill that baseload need when we need to. Nuclear can't really do that, and our nuclear capability is rather low, certainly compared to the French. So we need gas-fired power stations because you can literally fire them up at a moment's notice when the sun isn't there, when the wind isn't there. The problem is, Martin, it's very, very, very expensive to keep gas-fired power station capacity literally on standby. You need whole power stations that are just sitting there, full of staff, full of capability. They need to be maintained. And by definition, they're not used that often, so they can't generate the electricity and the revenue to cover that cost. So that cost of those gas-fired power stations on standby has to be spread across all electricity prices in the UK.
This is key. And I know some people will say, why are you showing a clip from GB News? I mean, Liam Halligan, I think, was at Channel 4. He's a very clever man, right? But this is key, is that even if 90% of your electricity is coming from renewables and only 10% from gas, you need that base load. And by the way, nuclear can also do that. That's why I personally think we need nuclear in this country. Until storage is overcome as a problem, it's probably going to take 20 years, 30 years. As in a new technology will come online, probably take 50 years to actually, completely go to nuclear as the baseload. But regardless, in the short term, you have to have something that can kick in because of intermittency problems. There's not enough wind, there's not enough solar. You need other technologies. Some can be maybe tidal, sure. You might be able to get some more hydropower somewhere, but broadly speaking, you need something else. Gas is pretty good at that. You don't want any coal because it's so dirty, but gas is pretty good at that. And the point is that the higher your reliance on renewables, the more expensive that gas becomes because, as he said, you're not using it very regularly. So actually the marginal cost of the energy generated from the gas is going up and up and up and up in a necessary relationship to how much renewables you're using. This is not an argument against renewables, as you'll see in a moment. So we need gas and nuclear. We know that. Then there's the fact, and again, this is completely ignored by Labour, that heating homes in the winter is done by gas. It has zero to do with electricity. The conversation around gas relates to two things: generating electricity, yes, and warming our homes. And in this country, it's a cold country in the winter, far more money is spent on people warming their homes, which is gas. The truth is, there is absolutely no guarantee of falling gas prices in the years ahead. That is the thing that we'll be using to warm our homes. Because while it's true that the price of renewable energy is falling, it's also true that renewable energy isn't especially profitable too. It has returns of around 5% a year, while oil and gas has returns of 15%. So this idea of GB Energy crowding an investment doesn't make any sense. On so many levels. Why would you invest in renewables when, without subsidies, they're far less profitable? This is something I discussed, by the way, at the weekend on Downstream. All of this is, of course, an argument for real public ownership of energy in this country. Wind, solar, nuclear, and yes, for the next 10, 20 years, gas. Because when there are intermittency issues for those next 10 or 20 years, that shouldn't screw the consumer. That's the conversation we need. Public ownership to capture the profits of the renewables revolution when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, and public ownership of oil and gas to guarantee that while we transition, cheap energy is guaranteed for the people of this country. Before we go to the next story, here's a clip of Ed Miliband talking about GB Energy.
I've got 30 seconds to tell you about Great British Energy, our new publicly owned energy company. It's going to be ace. It's going to cut bills. It's going to create good jobs. It's going to give us energy security, and it's going to tackle the climate crisis. How? By investing in things like solar panels, wind power, nuclear power, to power our country and get us off dependence on fossil fuels. It's the right thing to do. It's going to invest in new technologies like floating offshore wind. And best thing of all, it's not going to be owned by a private company. It's going to be owned by you, the British citizen. Vote Labour on July the 4th.
I love this over-caffeinated kind of, it's going to do this. Look, I've said this again so many times. I think when it comes to bills in this country, around 3 times more is spent on heating than electricity, right? Very expensive. GB Energy has zero implication in terms of heating your home, which is really the lion's share of household bills in this country. Great if we can move to entirely renewable electricity. By the way, Scotland's already doing it, but that really is not the whole story here. And personally, I feel that Labour's being a little bit misleading about this and about what GB Energy means for bills, for energy security. I think it's good that we have a green investment bank. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea, but my worry is it doesn't deliver what they say it's going to deliver. And actually that undermines arguments for public ownership because they're not doing it in, I think, a meaningful, holistic way. Earlier today, Novara's very own Moya Lothian-McLean appeared on BBC Politics Live. She appeared alongside Harriet Harman and Tim Montgomery. And it's fair to say some interesting points were exchanged. Let's have a look at what they discussed.
She's blazed a trail and there are more black and Asian women MPs. But actually, if you're in a party, ultimately, you have to work to change that party. I want to change that party on women and on black people and Asian people.
Moya, she is
you've got to do it from within.
She is standing. And she's been approved by the NEC.
There has been a massive story missed here, which is about the selections process. So the guard is changing, but the question is, how are the people being selected who are coming through? And both on the Conservative and Labour sides, are 2 dominant parties. There are huge questions about how fair these selection processes are. For example, I was talking to journalist Michael Crick yesterday, who has been closely following these selection processes, and he actually called the standing down of several Labour MPs corruption. In the manner in which they have resigned, which is a big claim to make, and he is someone who identifies as being on the Labour right of the party. Now, what's happened in some of these selection processes is people have resigned at the last minute. So, in Blair's day, they did this too, and sometimes they received peerages later. But what is also happening... Just by coincidence. Yeah. What is also happening is that the Labour head office and the NEC changed the rules last year so that they could parachute people into seats as candidates without consulting the local constituency parties. So you now have some of the leaders of the most secretive think tanks in Labour parachuting the safest seats in Labour in the country.
Well, what do you make of that?
Well, I would say that Keir Starmer and the NEC have got a responsibility to make sure in every single constituency there is somebody who is right for public service, right for being a Labour...
when they've never been?
Well, 'twas ever thus, you could say, of course. You could say...
Why is somebody sits in the NEC being approved by the NEC to stand as a Labour candidate without any consultation from local parties?
Is it a good look? I don't know about the individual... I'll tell you what is a good look. I'll tell you what is a good look, is that we have got a fantastic team of candidates, and you will be really pleased with all of our, not all of them, but most of our candidates. Well,
let me ask him about it.
Moya, amazing. Very hard to do what she's done there, by the way. When you've got everybody being so pally, it's very hard to actually say, no, I really disagree. I think this is really bad. And it's really notable there what Joe Coburn's doing. Moya's asking a very key question here, right? Members of the NEC are basically signing off on members of the NEC being parliamentary candidates imposed without any input from local parties. That's awful, and it's a conflict of interest. You would think that a BBC politics show presenter would care about that, but rather than say, oh, well, that's a conflict of interest, she goes, is it a good look? Is it a good look? I don't care what it looks like. It's a conflict of interest. That's what we should care about. And before that, she said, it was ever thus. Okay, just because something's always happened, is that a reason to carry on? We used to have ancestor worship. Is that cannibalism? 10,000 years ago, people were eating, other humans. It was ever thus. No, we decided it was a really fucking stupid idea. I would say this is also a stupid idea. Very, very strange. And actually, we'll get back to this in a moment because we've got a few of these clips. It really underscores the unseriousness, the lack of seriousness and integrity in legacy media. Let's go back to today's episode of Politics Live and see what happens next.
Tim, you've tweeted this. Gove, Wallace, Javid, May, Redwood, Zahawi, Leadsom, Cash, Clark, all former ministers and former Prime Minister, all stepping down. We're witnessing an absolutely massive changing of the guard. What impact is it going to have?
Look, we're sat here with one of the most influential parliamentarians of the modern era, Harriet Harman. What she did with the Equalities Act, I didn't agree with it. But she, not all of it anyway. But you left your mark on politics to a huge extent. I reckon if you were part of the Labour team now, you'd be a more effective minister than you were a few years ago, because you've all your lessons. What the Conservative Party and Labour Party are going to experience, I think, after the next election, is such a parliament of novices, people who haven't been round the block once or twice, who haven't learned how to run a department. Of course, you need sort of new blood. You need people with new ideas, but you need to balance that with people who know how to run very complex Whitehall departments.
And the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party, what impact is it going to have for losing all this experience?
Well, it's going to mean that young MPs will make mistakes more often because they won't have those conversations in the tea room, on the back benches with colleagues who've made those mistakes before. Of course, everyone has to make their own mistakes in a way, and different generations make their own different mistakes. But that lack of knowledge, that lack of experience, I think is going to mean the next parliament is going to be much more dangerous than the recent parliaments, simply because there isn't that bedrock of knowledge.
This makes me laugh. Why don't we just have legislators for life? I know. Why don't we just not elect them? You know, Tim Montgomery is basically arguing for an unelected autocracy, aristocracy. Why don't we just get rid of the House of Commons, the House of Lords? They've got so much experience. We won't have any young people. It will all be 80-year-olds with inherited titles. Loads of experience. Well, sometimes you've got experience and you're wrong about stuff. Sometimes the experience you've accumulated has meant that actually you can't solve the problems. Very strange. Very strange. I mean, that's the point of democracy, is that new people can come along and fix things. Moya proceeded to make a really excellent response.
I think it'd be more dangerous, but the people being parachuted in are not new young MPs. A lot of them are people who've surrounded these parties for years as lobbyists, as think tank directors, as special advisors.
And you don't think that that is going to be productive?
I don't think it'd be productive when it's a lot of people who haven't shown any great genius for politics instead of showing great genius for networking and changing hands with money.
I mean, if you look, for example, I think you can relax, Tim. I think it's going to be absolutely fine. Rachel Reeves has been almost heading for the chancellorship since she was about 14.
Right.
Keir Starmer is a serious person, and I can tell you, you don't need to lie awake at night in your bed. They will be a cracking
Will
team
you accept a peerage? Will you accept a peerage?
I have said I would if I were lucky enough to be offered one.
Oh, so you would go into the House of Lords?
You step down whether they will accept peerages
nobody's actually... Goodbye from all of us here. Bye-bye.
This is meant to be a politics show. This is meant to be... It's worse. It's meant to be a politics show during a general election. I'm not watching light entertainment. What is this? I'm not watching Countdown, right? I'm not watching Dale Winton Supermarket Sweep. This is meant to be a show in the heart of Westminster talking about the national life of a country of 68 million people. What on earth is going on? Rachel Reeves has been on Corso's job since she was 14. That probably doesn't make her very qualified. I'd like her to have a real job, please. Or she works at the Bank of England, therefore she knows everything. Yeah, the Bank of England's got nothing wrong over the last 15 years, has it? It says so much, doesn't it, as well, that 3 years ago, Starmer was saying he'd abolish the House of Lords, but now it's all just a bit of a joke amongst the permanent political class. Sure, if they asked me, of course I'd do it. And notice as well, maybe you didn't notice it because she was spoken over, how Moya tries to ask an actually important political question about quid pro quos and the House of Lords. Sorry, Moya, too late. Bye-bye to everyone at home. You thought a politics show on the BBC would actually raise challenging, politically important questions? Bye-bye. We're having so much fun. We'll see you tomorrow. Mike, what did you make of the points Moya was making throughout that show?
Moya made some excellent points. I think she made a point about these candidates. These aren't young, hungry people who haven't been in politics or worked in politics, maybe beyond like some experience. These are people who've been lobbyists, who've been parachuted into these seats because this small clique run the Labour Party at the moment and are trying to look after each other, right? So after Faz Shaheen, right, was deselected as the Labour candidate for Chingford and Woodford Green, someone else was parachuted who had no connection to the area. Brent Councillor was parachuted in. Now, apparently she has some existing relationship with the NEC or something of that sort. So these are people who are looking after themselves, trying to put themselves into positions of power. And that can't be a good thing, right? Like, that's no way to run a political party. And I think lots of the cruelty we've seen from the Labour Party when it comes to the deselection of left-wing candidates, for me, it starts from two places, right? It starts from the idea that many of these people don't see the left as legitimate actors, right? So putting aside the looking after each other thing, they don't see the left as legitimate actors because, the left lost in 2019, lost in 2017, they're useless. That's kind of their thinking. Also, they're anti-Semitic, by the way. That's how they view the left, right? And then also there's this thing of just like this clique just basically running amok in the party. I think that, to me, suggests something about the governing strategy of this Labour Party. If this Labour Party think that the left are illegitimate actors and they're trying to draw upon the spirit of blood, I think they are, by the way, and I think they're doing a really bad job of that if that's the case. It says lots about how out of sync they are with the nation, how out of sync they are with the crisis we face. And also this idea of the left being illegitimate actors is just a load of nonsense. So I think there's a lot that Moya said that was absolutely fantastic there. And I think this idea of these lobbyists and these kind of this clique parachuting these people into these seats is a worry for me. It's a worry in terms of the quality of policies we're going to receive from these people. And I think Tim McGorry makes a good point about, politics is quite a complex job, right? You're going to be leading up these quite complex Whitehall departments. Are these lobbyists who essentially are looking out for each other, are they going to do a good job at heading up these departments if they become senior ministers? It remains to be seen for me. So I think there are a number of points Moya raised that are really good. And I'm always happy to see if it's Moya or Ash or herself doing a really good job on legacy media, because I think the more kind of progressive thinking we get out there, the better. And I think so often these shows can be quite pally. And it's like, very like, debates aren't going in the direction they should be. It's all very pally and, everyone's being quite nice. And I think at this moment in time, I just said, Aaron, we do need an element of kind of ferocious debate. We need to ask uncomfortable questions, right? Questions about selection processes and what this might mean for the governing strategy of a party. For me, like I said, I think the way the Labour Party has treated some of its candidates suggests that if it can treat its own in that way, what does it mean for them as vulnerable in society today? These are the questions we need to be asking, but we seem to be avoiding them. So it's good on you and Ash and Moya that we're asking difficult questions whenever we get a chance.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I think I've been blacklisted by the daytime BBC politics people, but that's fine by me. Yeah, it really was a interesting series of conversations, and so much to think about. I mean, Moya was just doing the basics of what a political journalist should be doing, but it was almost like it was almost an affront. Why are you doing political journalism here on a politics show? Anyway, that's all for us this evening. Mike, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Always a pleasure to have the B team in action. Was a fun show.
It was a fun show. It was a good show. These are great shows during the election. And thanks everyone for watching this evening. Come back to our channel just before 9 p.m. tonight. Yes, tonight. I'll be joined by Ash Sarkar for coverage of the first televised debate of the general election between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.